Hi, I'm Sophie Milliken, and welcome to this episode of the Ambition Accelerator Podcast. Today, I'm joined by Stephanie Kauffman, who is managing partner at Tahoe Ventures, where she advises a number of global brands. Okay, so welcome to Stephanie Kauffman, who is joining me from New York today, which is very exciting because I love New York. So very excited to speak to Stephanie, who also has some fantastic experience and I'm sure some very useful advice and stories for everyone. So Stephanie had a 20-year career at Universal Studios, moving up the ranks to Senior Vice President, Global Alliances. But 5 years ago, pivoted to women's health and cancer research, where you're now, is it Chief Partnerships Officer?
It is Chief Partnerships Officer.
Wow. Well, tell us a little bit more about your career story then, please, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you so much, Sophie. I'm so happy to be with you today. I had a 20-year career in Universal Studios, basically born out of this idea that when I was a young girl, I loved the movies, I loved entertainment, I loved Los Angeles, and I wasn't sure how I was going to get there because I grew up in Florida. But I actually started my career at Universal Theme Parks in Orlando and started as a brand manager and figured out that I had this knack for building partnerships. And I was very fortunate that others in my leadership saw that as well and moved up the career path to where I was recognized for my work in partnerships and was asked to lead a group out of Los Angeles that would cover the movie division, home entertainment, and theme parks on a global basis, and bringing brands who wanted to be in film, so product placement, who wanted to have a long-term relationship in our theme parks. And I ran that group for a number of years until about 5 years ago, when, and this happens so often for women in their careers, people in their careers, we were acquired by Comcast, who was making some changes within the studio environment and basically was looking to reallocate my group into different areas. And it would have meant that I was going to have to relocate back to Orlando and look at some opportunities with expansion that they were doing in Asia. And at that point, I felt it was time to look at something new. And that's where women's health and cancer research was a personal passion point. And I figured I had a great run at Universal. I'm ready to do something different. And that's when I joined the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, where I took all my skills I learned in entertainment and partnerships, was able to bring that to BCRF, where we now have a portfolio of 130 partners that are fundraising for cancer research. And so was able to make that pivot around something that I was passionate about.
So did you see that job advertised and just think, oh, that's, something that really excites me? Or were you approached, or did someone suggest you for it? Or
I think when I realized that at Universal, like my group was basically going to be made redundant. And so it gave me a moment to think about, okay, what are my next steps? Do I want to stay in entertainment? What do I want to do? And it was really this idea that I wanted to maybe move into a purpose space. And literally one night at like 11 o'clock at night, I started Googling Chief Partnerships Officer for purpose, for nonprofit. And I saw this post for the role. Actually, it was originally the Chief Communications Officer, which I hadn't really done communications, but I thought I could bring something to the table. So, as part of that is I'm a big believer in networking. And so I knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who could get to the CEO. And, that's one of the things I always talk about. It's like, you never know who knows somebody. And that's exactly what happened. So actually my boss at Universal, an incredible woman by the name of Stephanie Kauffman, she really helped champion my career, and she's a breast cancer survivor. And I said, I think this is what I want to do now. And she's like, you have to do this. So she got my resume in front of two other individuals who immediately advanced it to the CEO. And the CEO called me the next day, and we had a conversation about what I could bring to the table from a communications lens, which I hadn't done. I hadn't done PR. I hadn't done media. I knew my world of partnerships, but I was very grateful that the CEO understood all the skills, talents, and relationships I could bring to the table. So I started my new role as a chief communications officer. And then as the partnerships opportunity was growing, the board really wanted to make some investments in that space. So they said, can you come and run that piece of the business for BCRF and help us accelerate some additional funding? And so it was kind of, I got some great experience on the comms front, and I got some great experience now bringing back my partnership. But I think the lesson I take out of that is a couple of things. Is sometimes we as women, we're like, oh, I have to have all of the qualifications to do something. And the reality is, believe in yourself and believe in what you can deliver. And even if you're 60% of what the job is asking for, apply. And this is a perfect example of that. I don't have the traditional communications background, but I knew what I could bring to the table. I knew that I could sell myself, and then it's a little bit of fake it till you make it. And so I take that as a learning, like, if there's something that intrigues you and you've got most of what you think you need, apply for the role and you will figure it out. And that's what I've done for the last 5 years.
I love that. And I was just literally about to say that there's a big thing in the UK where we talk about how women only apply for jobs where they feel like they literally tick every criteria box, whereas men, I think it's meant to be something like 50 or 60%, and then they put themselves forward anyway. So I love that you've got a real live example of where you've said, right, well, I can bring this to the table. And it's looking at I guess your transferable skills from your previous role and what you can bring, and knowing your value and knowing that you can bring something to the table. I think sometimes women and men, we kind of get stuck in one career and we think, oh, we've made this choice now, this is our career. But actually, there's so many things from any role that you can transfer to another role. So it's great to hear that in action. Okay, so I've got some questions that I want to ask you that relate to some specific topics within the book. I'm trying to think which ones I want to ask you, because there's so many and I know we won't get through them all, but thinking about, I guess, at any point within your career, and actually it might be interesting to hear you reflect on earlier in your career and actually how you feel about this now, but within your career, have you set yourself specific goals within each role in terms of where you want to getting promoted or things like that, or earning this X amount of salary? Have you done that in the past?
No, absolutely. I kind of would map out in my mind this idea of, so when I first started at Universal Studios, I was a brand manager. And so I knew the work that I had to do there and what I had to learn. But I looked at people that I admired within the organization. I'm like, their job is really interesting. And so how am I going to get there? Because I really would like to be, at this level. And so I would set out those goals, knowing that those goals are going to change and your path is not always linear into how you get there. So initially, my goal was eventually, how do I create value? How do I stand out? How do I think about getting to this point? It was a director level and then eventually a vice president level when I was on the theme park space. And so on that front, what I did is kind of map out my 2-year, my 4-year plan, knowing that it will change, and it really did. And through that process, what I also did to kind of make sure that I was ready was to really understand the business. So I took on assignments. I would raise my hand for assignments that weren't always the glitzy of assignments, but they were kind of the assignments that I knew would make a difference in the business. And some of those were not sexy assignments at all. Like, it was figuring out Universal's call tree. So if you called Universal as a guest to find out information about the theme park, it was not the easiest of experience. So literally, I'm not a call center expert, but unraveling that whole experience made a huge difference, and it caught the chairman's eye. And he's like, you can fix problems. I have some special projects for you. And I was a manager. I was also very fortunate that I had a boss at that time who he also saw that in me, and he gave me a lot of opportunity to be seen. But no, I absolutely laid out a plan, and my goal was I wanted to be one of the youngest vice presidents in a male-dominant space, not the first female vice president. I want to be one of the first youngest. I wanted to be the youngest vice president, regardless of gender. And I did that. And I became the youngest vice president at the time in theme parks. And that was at 31. But more that was about believing in myself.
Yeah, and when you hit that, two things. One, did you celebrate? Did you stop and give yourself a pat on the back? And two, did you then set yourself a new goal?
That's a great question. Did I celebrate? I don't know that I celebrated in the way that I should. And I don't know that I really reflected on what I had accomplished. And I think part of that is, I think sometimes as women, we don't allow ourselves to celebrate, and we don't allow ourselves to talk about what we've accomplished because we don't want to come off as bragging. We don't see that aspect in our male counterparts, right? And so when I reflect on that, I didn't probably take the time to really celebrate what I had accomplished, that I hit vice president, which was, a significant goal for me that I was able to do in the time that I made happen. So if I look back now, I wish I would have taken that time to celebrate. And so part one of that. Part two is, did I set a new goal? Yes, I set a new goal that I was actually ready. I wanted to make a change and move into a bigger role within Universal Studios and make a transition actually to Los Angeles. And how could I really now understand the movie side of the business, and how was I going to get there? And so I set that goal for myself, that within 4 years' time, I wanted to create an opportunity for myself to move into a bigger role within corporate partnerships that was enterprise-wide. And I did hit that goal. I moved to LA when I was 35. And I was at a vice president level. And from there, I was like, okay, how do I get to senior vice president and have real opportunity to be at the table with the chairman of the studio?
Sounds exciting. What's happening with that? So throughout your career, have you had role models that you've looked up to?
Oh, I have several role models in different points of my career, and it's one of those things that I encourage, is finding those role models and mentors. And by the way, regardless of where you are in your career today and what age you may be. So I would tell you, my first role model was many years ago. An incredible woman, Renda Goodwin. I was one of my first jobs was working for the Kissimmee St. Cloud Convention and Visitors Bureau, which is a tourism agency just right outside of Orlando, encouraging visitors to come to Kissimmee and be at the doorstep of Walt Disney World. And she came in with all this great experience, and I was, really super young, and she took me under her wing. And one of the first things that she said to me was, your job is not to win Miss America, meaning be Miss Congenial all the time. Your job is to have a voice, to represent a point of view. People are not always going to like you, but if you are respectful and you represent your point of view with respect and tone and commitment, then you're doing your job. You can't please everybody at the time, but you got to do what's right for the business. And that has always stuck with me in terms of that gift that she gave me. And we actually, we moved together to another career path before I joined Universal. So she was my first role model. And to this day, I keep in touch with her, and I use her as a touchstone for advice. And then when I moved into Universal, I actually had a couple of role models. And I, so often we talk about women role models, but I was very fortunate to have some male executives who really championed my career. And I had three. I had Fred Lounsbury, who was our Senior Vice President of Sales, who also was very much do what was right for the business, and he believed in my talent. So he would give me opportunity to say, here's what you need to do. And so I would take a look at how he interacted with his team, how he, if there was some sort of mistake that was made, I always admire the fact that he did not try to throw somebody under the bus on his team. He's like, you know what, we made that mistake, we're going to address it. And so he owned it as a leader. And then he would have a private conversation like, okay, here's how we're going to adjust. So that was a leadership lesson that I took. And finally, a big person who influenced my career was Ron Meyer, or is Ron Meyer, who's the chairman of NBC Universal and the head of Universal Studios. And what I always appreciated, and to this day appreciate about Ron, is he makes it an effort to return every phone call, every email that he gets, regardless of where that is, within 24 to 36 hours, because every voice matters. And so it's reminded me that it's always important to stay in communication with everyone that comes through in whatever capacity. And he also very much had the mantra of assumption is the mother of all F-ups. He says it a little bit more plainly than that. Is like, don't ever assume, just really do the work and just don't coast by. So I've had several mentors, and then my last mentor was Stephanie Sperber, who I've mentioned previously, who led my group, and she was a big believer in be brief, be brilliant, and be gone to make the work happen. And those are some of the role models and leadership lessons I took from that.
There's some good ones there. I like it. It's good. Thinking about the people that you surround yourself with, do you think that the people that you surround yourself with affect your performance?
100%. I think if you surround yourself with people who have shared values in terms of how they interact with you, that want to figure things out and create resourcefulness and solutions, and are all about, again, what's right for the business, how do we affect change. When you're in that energy, I feel like you accomplish more. I certainly have been in groups where it just gets mired down in petty office politics and gossip. And so what I find in those instances, when I have seen myself in that thing, it brings the energy way down. It doesn't make you as enthusiastic about your role. And so what I like to do is try to surround myself with people who just want to do great work and want to advance things. And certainly you always have to navigate some of the politics that exist, but you don't have to be the gossip reporter. And so I do find in those it just becomes a toxic energy, and I'd rather be with folks who have shared energy of doing great work that we can be proud of, and then how do we look to advance each other. And sometimes I do feel we don't allow ourselves in that, kind of gossip, like how are we elevating our group? How are we elevating our peers? How am I elevating the colleagues who are on my team? And so I think it's really important to look at who you're surrounding yourself by, and kind of the energy and the voice in which they are creating opportunities in the organization you work for.
I definitely agree with that. And I think because I've been out of corporate life for quite a while now, because I run a business rather than sort of be in a huge business, I feel like that's a bit easier for me in some ways, because I can surround myself with other business owners very easily. And so I've got quite a tight tribe of other business owners that they don't operate in the same field as me. If they did, I don't think that would matter. I think that's kind of irrelevant, but we all get each other's challenges and we support each other. How is that possible within a larger organization like the ones you've worked for? Is it that because you've got to be careful, haven't you? I mean, I remember, I worked for a big retailer in the UK, and it's hard once you start getting promoted to interact with people within the organization in the same way if you're then managing them. So is it a case that you seek to build your tribe or your supporters more externally, or you look to friends, or how does that work in a big organization?
No, that's a great question, particularly if you find yourself being promoted and you kind of leave a group where you may have been peer-to-peer. So I think it's a couple of things. For me, in terms of how was I looking to build my tribe, number one, I would still look to the group of people I would work with who may have been peer-to-peer, and like, what were those relationships there, and how would I think about navigating those? But I think more importantly is like, now that if I've been promoted, there's going to be a whole new circle of people I'm going to be interacting with. So what I would look to is who is making a difference, who is actually leading with conviction and trying to do the right things. We don't always get it right. Who was really creating teams that felt like they were high performance, but respectful. And I would look to like, how do I get into those circles, because there's some shared values. So what I would do is, even if it was not in the group that I was currently in, is I would then reach out, like, I really appreciated your work on X, Y, and Z. Would love to get to know more about that. And so I would try to actually find those external groups, whether that was, if I think about my studio experience, where sometimes I would go outside the studio and really try, and the studio business is really interesting. It's not like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, which is super competitive and you never talk to Coke. If you work for Pepsi, you don't ever talk to somebody at Coca-Cola. In the movie studio business, we all kind of had this shared thing, like, because our films would be different. So I would actually lean on some of my outside studio contacts to understand how they were navigating through their workspace. And then also I looked at my friendship groups and to try to build that tight. I like to keep I do like to keep my what I would call my internal tribe pretty tight, relative to my friend group, to my work group. And then also as I look externally, like who makes sense for me to have in my tribe? Because there's also this situation where we only have so many hours in the day. So I also want to look at where I'm investing my time and my energy. And so I definitely use that filter, because I'm like you and everybody else, there's only 24 hours in the day. So where am I investing my time on those tribes that make sense? And where I don't want to deal with what I call sometimes the energy vampires that just suck the energy out of the room. How do I mitigate that? Because I want to be able to go deep and resourceful with the tribes that I do have.
That's great. So you've touched on this slightly, so I know which question I'm going to talk to you about next. Okay. And I always feel a bit frustrated bringing this up as a topic, because I don't hear men talking about it in the same way, but it's an issue. So it's something that I do want to talk about. So, and it's work-life balance.
Yeah.
So we get asked about it all the time. And in the book, the topic that I've written about with work-life balance, or my view is actually that it's not possible. So you quite often read stuff with women going, you can have it all and you can do this and you do that. And actually, I don't think that's fair or true. And I think you set yourself up to fail if you think that is possible. And my view is that the closest you can get to it is to prioritize what's important to you at that point in time, but it can't be everything. You have to pick the few things. So, I look at things in terms of family, work, health, maybe exercise, social, all those things. And you can just do a bit, but not everything at the same time. What do you think, Stephanie?
I think probably one of the biggest myths that have been sold to women is that you can have it all and you can balance everything and you can do it all on your own. Yeah. And I think for me, I think it's a total myth. The work-life balance is in some ways an oxymoron. You're constantly having to pick. You're constantly having to choose, and you don't always feel great about those choices. And I think, for me, it becomes a scenario of exactly that, is looking at my calendar every day. What am I compartmentalizing in terms of, okay, there are going to things that are going to fall. They just are. You can't be, running a company and all that entails, and then, being fully engaged. Like, you have to figure out the tension and how to navigate that. And I do think that that's just one of the biggest fallacies that's sold into women. Like, if you want to be in that leadership, and you do the best that you can, at the end of the day, you just do the best that you can and figure out, today I'm going to focus on this, and this is going to be the priority, and then I'm going to give my energy over here, and feel okay about it. Because anybody who's telling you that they can manage it all, I would want to know what additional resources are they tapping into to manage it all. Mm-hmm. And if they have that, that's amazing. But I think it's an unfair burden to place on women that we've got to be perfect in every aspect of our life. Mm-hmm. It's not true. We're gonna have our misses, and it's not gonna be perfect. And sometimes it's messy. And we just have to figure out how we schedule our lives, and we have to know that certain things are not going to be always perfect and prioritized in the way they should. And you just got to get through it day by day.
Yeah, I really like the fact that I think everyone that I've spoken to so far has said the same thing. And, I think sort of I think it was more when I got married. I'm divorced now, but when I got married and had my daughter and stuff, and at that point, it just felt like everything was becoming really stressful, because I've always been ambitious and I've always wanted to progress at work. And I had, a very successful corporate career before I set my business up. And it just felt like all these pressures were on me at once. And it was like, how do people manage this? And it's, in some ways, it's easier now because financially I can afford to outsource things. And I think as soon as people are able to do that, they should, and not feel any guilt about that. So because that helps you. But it's like you say, you just can't do everything. It's insane to think that you can. And I think we need to just be more honest about that, because if people feel that there's this sort of myth that, you know, that it's true that you can do everything, then they're just setting themselves up to fail, and they'll just never get any sleep and just be doing stuff all the time. Just not realistic, is it? It really
not. It's completely, it's just unrealistic. And I think in my case, kind of a scenario was, I am the stepmom to 3 children. And so I was, you know, I had been married previously, but there was a huge gap in which I wasn't. And then when I remarried, I was 42, no kids, 42, and now I'm a stepmom
to
to
3.
3 kids. At the time, they were 11, 8, and 3.
Yeah.
They're amazing kids, but my whole life changed in terms of there are now, you know, recitals to go to and baseball games. And then, you know, I was like, I want to coach softball. I'm like, okay, when am I going to figure out the time to do that?
Yeah.
And be present. And so, you know, I kind of, in my way, zoomed into having 3 kids, you know, overnight, stepchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been great, but finding that balance. And I think it also changed my lens too. Like, work-life balance is a myth. Because then I was actually, you know, certainly living it versus being a single person. And so we got to just give each other, you know, give each other a break.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. So when you are at work in work mode, do you have a preference in terms of your working pattern? Like, are you an early bird or a night owl? You know, what's your preference?
Yeah, I'm definitely more of a night owl. I've always been a night owl. I don't know why. Now, do I do the early meetings? Sure. Do I personally love doing, you know, 8 a.m. meetings? No, not necessarily. So kind of what my schedule looks like, just for me, I think at night I can kind of really think about, you know, where I want to go. It's not a style for everybody, but what I do try to do in the morning is block out my calendar from 8 to 9, not because I don't have meetings, but it gives me an hour just to look at my day, look at what we need to accomplish, you know, kind of sets the tone for the day. And it helps me to, quite frankly, skim all the business headlines that need to be skimmed so I can be really informed on what's going on in the space that I occupy, so I can, you know, be able to bring that to the table, and then really look to kind of be ready to go by 9 or 10, depending on what our schedules look like. And then for me, what I try to do is if I just tend to be more of a night owl anyway, but obviously be present for my family. And then, you know, I'll take a look at if I need to do work that's, you know, then I'll look to kind of go back online at 10 o'clock at night. It's not for everybody, but it's just, I've always been a night owl from that lens. But for me, it's actually, I do think it's important to block out time on your calendar in the morning, just so you can have a moment to like set your priorities for the day and like knock out some of the emails that you're like, oh, I got to just deal with it. Knock that out. And that way you can start your day of meetings fresh and not having all of that kind of what I would call housekeeping work hanging over your head.
I think there's a lot to be said for planning. I feel that I've come to planning quite late. I guess I've always had sort of to-do lists, and the last couple of years I've got way more into it, and I've discovered bullet journaling. I don't know if you've come across that, and those sorts of things. And I feel that by taking that time out to plan things, and I'm like a real planner now. So at the beginning of the year, I like to plan the year at a very high level, and then I like to do sort of a monthly plan, a weekly plan, and review things. And I feel that if I don't do that, I am definitely not so productive. So that does help for me. And I think, like you, in the morning, I like to have that time first thing. And I'm the opposite to you, because I'm definitely an early bird. Like, I'm up 5 a.m. Bing, just wake up. I don't even set my alarm anymore. I just wake up. But then the downside of that is, you know, come the evening, I'm kind of falling asleep probably when you're coming to life. But I guess if you can ideally work in a way that suits whichever your preference is, then that's the ideal, really, isn't it? So obviously you've had loads of success with your career, and you've done some really cool stuff. Would you say that you've ever had a case of imposter syndrome? Have you come across that?
Where I was like, why am I here? How did I get here?
Yeah, do you have that over there? Because it's a big sort of buzzword, I guess, over here with women in particular, frustratingly, about how, yeah, you kind of feel like how did it happen? How did I get here? I'm not good enough, or they're going to find me out, or that sort of thing. Do you have
Yeah,
that?
no, I definitely, I think particularly if you, you're advancing in your career and you're like, wait a minute, I'm now at the table with people I've read about. How did it happen? And certainly, I think about one instance. I got a phone call from a boss that I had, and there was a very big meeting with a very big corporation about closing a pretty significant deal. And so he was supposed to head over to Europe, and he was getting ready to fly out, couldn't find his passport. So I get a call from his office, like, he can't find his passport. You're going to have to go. And this is a significant deal. I thought, oh my goodness, my career is now going to be on the line. Fortunately, I had basically worked on the whole presentation and scripting out what it needed to be and what the deal points were going to need to be. So thankfully, I knew that. And so literally, I had 2 hours to get on a plane and fly over to Europe and present to the corporate board of this corporation for ultimately what would have been a $200 million deal. And I definitely had that moment of, wait, why am I here? How did I get here? Am I the right person to be doing this deal? And then the pressure of, like, if this doesn't work and the deal doesn't come through, will it be questioned? Was it because of me? Because, my boss didn't go, or was it because the deal was maybe not the right deal? So I definitely had that moment of, like, how did I get here? And then, so I think that there's that piece. And definitely when I was in the movie studio business, I had read about a lot of people, like, in Vanity Fair, and I would be at the table negotiating, big product placement deals that included, movie directors and, talent and celebrity, and figuring out those deals. I'm like, why am I here? Like, how did that happen? A small town girl from Kissimmee, Florida, who finished her bachelor's degree at 31, big dreams, like, how on earth did I get here? So yeah, I've had that moment. And then I'm like, oh, I know why I'm here.
Yeah. So it's just that reassuring yourself,
yeah,
isn't it? I bet you've got some great stories to tell from some of those days with directors, and
oh, sure.
There's all sorts hot topics still, I think, even now, isn't there? So that's interesting. So we have something in the UK. I don't know whether you use this phrase as well, where we talk about paying it forward. Yeah. So in terms of supporting other women, etc. And clearly you're a fan, because you've joined me today, and you wanted to get involved with this project. But what else do you do in your normal life to pay it forward, to support other women coming through the ranks?
No, I'm a huge, listen, there were people who were there for me and helped me get to my career level. So it's always been this idea, like, then I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to young women to help them navigate their career journey. So a couple of things that I do is, on a personal front, I look at, volunteer boards that I can be a part of that kind of have that ethos. So I currently sit on the board of the International Women's Media Foundation, which is about helping women in journalism be able to have the resources and the capacity to be able to tell those stories and having a free press, because journalism doesn't have always the most equity, and sometimes female journalists don't always get, if you look at bylines. So I'm on that board in terms of how can I help with my experience advance their ability to tell those stories. I'm also a big fan of, if someone reaches out to me and says, hey, can I have a coffee? Or can I just talk to you about your career path? I really try to make space for people who reach out to me. I'm also a big believer in being a mentor. And so wherever I can give time to people in my own organization and help listen to what do they think about for their career path? What are they trying to navigate through? How would they handle a situation? So I try to be a mentor. I try to be someone that I can help them network. And then finally, I try to find organizations where I can effectuate change for women's progression. But I think ultimately, the advice that we give is for those of us who've been able to kind of move up into our careers, we have an obligation to lift up women. And sometimes we as women don't always do that in the right way, but we have an obligation to help them understand their career paths and make introductions and help them network, and then mentor them in a way that is hopefully helpful and valuable to their career path. And if you're not doing that, I would encourage you to. You get so much more out of it than you put in, quite frankly.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Okay, I'm conscious that we're almost out of time, which is really, really fast. But to end, what one key piece of advice have you received which has served you really well, or a piece of advice that you've just got that you would like to pass on?
I think there's two pieces. Number one, aim high and then deliver. So again, kind of earlier in our conversation, like if you have 60% of what you believe a career needs, go for it, aim high, and then you know that you can deliver it. So that's number one. Number two, I would say failure is learning. I have definitely had failures in careers or projects, and I learned so much about that. And then how did I take that and then put that into practice? So I would take a look at those two things. And the third piece of advice that I walk away is read. Do more than just Facebook, do more than social media, like read, take a look at business, so find an aggregator like a Quartz to read the business headlines. So when you're at the table with whoever you may be at the table with, where finally you find yourself at the table with the chairman, you can actually know about what's going on in the business, what's happening in the world, and you will be able to always be on the ready with those types of opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Oh, it's been so nice to talk to you, and you've got some great stories and some great advice. It's really interesting. When everything goes back to normal, maybe when I'm next in New York and come and see you, or come to one of your events if you run big events, that would be cool.
We would love to have you, and I just want to extend my thanks to you for putting out there how women can really power up their career, and taking the time to reach out to women at various points in their career, entrepreneurs, corporate executives. So I really applaud the work that you're doing.
I hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode of the Ambition Accelerator as much as I enjoyed recording it. If this was your first experience of tuning in, go back and listen to previous episodes, as there are some brilliant ones. Please do go and check those out. Hope to catch you next time.